It was supposed to be the easiest errand of my week. I was standing in the flower aisle at Publix in Savannah with a basket on my arm doing bride math in my head. White hydrangeas were on sale. Baby's breath was 2 for 1. I had a playlist in my earbuds, and I was already picturing October sunlight over the marsh and my mom smiling for once instead of worrying about money. I had spent 3 years saving for that day. Double shifts, no vacations, no designer, anything. $50,000 sitting in a wedding fund because I wanted to walk into a venue and say this part is covered. I was proud of that. I was proud that I was not letting my family pay. I was proud that I was not letting my aunt use my wedding as another performance of the Wellington name. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown Charleston number. I almost let it go to voicemail. I shifted the basket to my hip and answered. "This is Grace." A cautious voice said, "Miss Holloway, this is Colin from Magnolia Harbor Estate in Charleston." I smiled because I loved that place. Big veranda, oak trees, water in the background. "Yes, hi, is everything all right?" He hesitated. "We just received an updated contract signed under your name for your event on October 12th. I frowned. Updated. "Yes, Mom." "It looks like the package has been changed to the 300 guest premium catering package with wine service and a full string quartet." My brain stopped. I looked down at the little plastic tag on the flowers like maybe I had misread the price and it would fix this whole moment. No, that is not my package. I booked for 80, garden ceremony, local catering. That was my contract. I know. The man said it like he was hoping I would tell him this was normal. The signature is Wellington, Marjorie Wellington. She said she is your aunt and that she is handling things for you. I walked away from the flower aisle because my chest was getting hot and I did not want to cry near pumpkins. She what? She also asked us to go ahead and run the additional $25,000 today to secure the premium date. He lowered his voice. "The system shows the charge went through to the card and account on file in your name, the one ending in 1904. That was my wedding account. The one I had opened in college when Aunt Marjorie said, "Honey, let me help you open something in case you ever need to plan a milestone." I used it for 6 years and never once thought she would reach back in. I swallowed. "Sir, I did not approve that." "I understand, Miss Holloway." He sounded nervous, but the signer said you were busy and that she manages family events. I left the cart in the middle of the aisle and walked straight out of Publix. Savannah heat hit me in the face. I sat in the car and opened my banking app with hands that did not want to stay steady. The number blinked at me. Funds transferred 50,000.00 from Grace Ann Holloway to Magnolia Harbor Estate. My stomach dropped so hard I had to close my eyes. I called the bank. The woman at the bank was trying to be cheerful. "We can see the transaction. It was authorized by a linked party." Linked party. I repeated it slow. "Can you tell me who?" She clicked. It says Wellington, relationship guardian from original opening. The way some people say the weather is nice. I laughed, but it came out wrong. "So, is that my mom or my aunt?" The banker paused. "Was that a joke?" I said kind of. "Depends on which one is stealing my money today." She laughed because Americans laugh when they do not know what to say, and I did not blame her. I hung up and the laughter died fast. I sat there with the AC on and rain starting to drizzle on the windshield, and all I could see was 3 years of quiet work being spent on a party I was not even invited to speak at. I thought about my fiancé Daniel working nights at the hospital so we would not have to borrow from anyone. I thought about my mom, who still feels like she owes her big sister for paying for my dad's funeral. I thought about my aunt in Charleston sitting in silk robes calling venues and saying, "Cancel that small wedding, make it bigger, make it ours." This was not a mistake. This was not confusion. This was control. This was toxic family dressed up as generosity. This was family betrayal using my name and my account because she could. I stared at the notification on my phone. Funds transferred. $50,000. I always thought family protected you. Mine had just bought themselves a better party with my wedding. Savannah looked peaceful from the outside. The streets smelled like magnolias. The air moved slow, and everyone waved like they had nowhere else to be. But behind the porch swings and sweet tea smiles, the town had its quiet hierarchies. My mother and I lived in a small one-story house behind the old train tracks. She sold handmade flower arrangements at the weekend market. I helped her after work wrapping stems with ribbons she reused from old bouquets. We were not poor, but we were not part of what people called Southern old money either. That title belonged to my Aunt Marjorie Wellington, who lived 30 minutes away in a house with marble floors, imported rugs, and a fountain that ran all year, even in drought. She had once helped pay for my father's funeral after his heart attack, and that generosity had become her favorite weapon. Every time she wanted to remind us of our place, she would sigh and say, "We paid for your father's funeral, remember." My mother always thanked her softly and lowered her head. I learned early that in this family, gratitude was another form of debt. When I was 18, Aunt Marjorie offered to help me open a college savings account. She said, "You will need someone responsible to help you manage it, dear." I had just lost my father and was too young to understand what joint access meant. She smiled and signed her name beside mine, saying it would make banking easier. I believed her because that was what daughters and nieces did in families like ours. Now that old account had become the doorway she used to take $50,000 without blinking. I tried not to think about that as I drove with my mother to Marjorie's house for Sunday lunch, but the thought stayed like a stone under my ribs. Her house sat on a hill with 3 cars in the driveway. My cousin Becca was already outside in a white sundress, posing for photos with her fiancé. Inside the table was set for 12 with silver spoons lined like soldiers. Marjorie's voice filled every room before I even saw her. "Grace, darling, you made it. Sit down, we were just talking about weddings." Becca giggled, flashing her engagement ring, a diamond the size of my rent. Aunt Marjorie looked at me the way someone looks at a puzzle piece that does not fit the picture. "How are your little plans going? Still keeping it small?" I nodded and said yes, small and simple. She smiled sweetly. "Small weddings are cute. Becca's will be televised." Everyone laughed politely. The word televised stuck in my head like a mosquito. My mother tried to change the subject to weather. Marjorie ignored her and went on describing the influencer deal Becca had landed with a bridal company. They were paying for her designer gown in exchange for posting. I sat there chewing my salad slowly, wondering what it would feel like to have people clap for your happiness instead of competing with it. When dessert came, Marjorie snapped her fingers for more napkins. I stood up to help carrying the tray from the kitchen. As I set down the plates, one of the guests, a friend of Becca's, handed me an empty glass and said, "Could you refill this, please?" I froze. Aunt Marjorie smiled at her guest, not at me, and said, "She will take care of it." For a moment, I was not sure if she was joking or if she had truly mistaken me for catering staff. My mother saw it, her lips pressed tight, her hand trembling around her cup. I walked to the kitchen quietly and filled the glass. When I returned, Marjorie's laughter rang through the room, smooth and rehearsed. Becca looked embarrassed but said nothing. I placed the glass down gently and sat back at the table as if nothing had happened. Inside, I felt something small snap. Later, when I helped Mom gather our things, I overheard Marjorie whispering to another guest. "Poor Grace means well. She just does not understand what a real wedding takes. Old money understands tradition. New money spends without taste." I closed my eyes. It was a classic line from her playbook. She believed she owned the definition of dignity, success, even love. To her family meant obedience and kindness was a transaction. On the drive home, Mom stayed quiet until we crossed the bridge into our side of town. Then she said softly, "She should not have said that." I looked at her profile, the fine lines near her eyes, the way she always defended the woman who hurt her most. She never learned how to fight back because for years, Aunt Marjorie had been both savior and jailer. That was the design of a toxic family, a pattern of rescue and repayment that never ended. It was financial generosity used to buy silence. I realized that night it had shaped all of us. It made my mother afraid to speak, and me too, polite to protect myself. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, hearing Aunt Marjorie's voice replay in my head. Small weddings are cute. Becca's will be televised. I imagined her calling the venue again, her signature curling over my name, telling them she was doing me a favor. I opened my laptop and looked through old emails until I found one from 6 years ago, the day we opened that joint account. The subject line read, "College Fund Agreement." Her name sat beside mine. 1 account, 2 signers. She had never closed it. That was the opening she had used to steal from me in broad daylight. I stared at it until the words blurred and thought, she always finds a way to own what she did not earn. Outside, the crickets sang. Inside, something colder began to grow. I whispered into the dark, "Never again." Ever smiled through a dinner where everyone secretly insulted you? Keep listening. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a half-eaten bagel going cold beside me. The wedding file sat in front of me like a quiet accusation. I took a deep breath and called Magnolia Harbor Estate. The same man from yesterday picked up. His voice was polite but strained. "Miss Holloway, this is Colin. How can I help you today?" I said carefully, "I need to confirm the changes made to my contract." He hesitated. "Mrs. Wellington said you were busy. She said you asked her to handle the upgrade for your own good." My chest tightened. For my own good. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Colin, could you please send me a copy of that signed document?" There was a pause, the faint click of a keyboard. Then he said, "Of course," and the email arrived seconds later. I opened it and stared. The name at the top read, "Client Grace Holloway," but the signature beneath it was Marjorie Wellington in her neat, confident loops. I felt my mouth go dry. I forwarded the email to myself, saved it, then printed it. The sound of the printer was the only noise in the house. I sat there looking at the paper at my stolen name until I realized I was shaking. My phone buzzed again. A text from Daniel. "Good morning, beautiful. How is the planning?" I stared at the message and could not bring myself to answer. "How do you tell the man you love that your family just hijacked your wedding?" I grabbed my car keys. The drive to Charleston felt longer than usual. By the time I turned into Aunt Marjorie's neighborhood, the houses had grown larger, each one framed by trimmed hedges like a painting of wealth. I parked at the end of her driveway and walked up the stone steps. When she opened the door, she was wearing a silk robe and holding a champagne flute. The scent of gardenias floated through the air. "Grace," she said brightly, as if she had been expecting me. "What a surprise." I lifted the printed contract slightly. "We need to talk." She laughed, tilting her head. "Oh, sweetheart, you will thank me later. A wedding under my name gets better vendors. You are too young to understand how this world works." I said quietly, "You signed a legal contract in my name." She waved her hand. "Details. Families share everything. The Wellington name opens doors. Without it, you would be in a barn with folding chairs." I took a step closer. "You stole $50,000. Her smile faltered for a moment, then returned sharper. "I rearranged it," she said. "You are getting a much grander day. You should be grateful." I could feel the heat in my face. I lowered my voice so it would not shake. I did not ask for grand. I asked for mine. She sighed like I was a stubborn child. "Grace, this is what family does. We help each other. We elevate. Do not be dramatic." From behind her, a neighbor called out from the sidewalk, "Morning, Marjorie." The woman's small dog barked twice. Marjorie smiled and raised her glass. The neighbor glanced at me, standing there holding papers, and smirked. "That is family for you." The words hit harder than I expected. Marjorie turned back to me, her expression cold now that she had an audience. She said in a low voice, "You should be careful about embarrassing me in my own home." I looked around at the marble entryway, the chandelier, the mirror reflecting both of us. For a second, I saw what she saw: a girl from the wrong side of Savannah trying to act like she belonged. Something inside me cracked. I set the contract on her polished table. "You will fix this," I said. "You will call the venue and explain." She took a sip of champagne, her lips painted perfect coral. "I already did. Everything is set. It is under control." I reached for the glass to move it aside, and my hand brushed it wrong. The champagne spilled across the table, running down the edge and onto the thick carpet. Marjorie gasped and jumped back. Her voice rose sharp and theatrical. "That rug is Persian." I stared at the spreading stain and said softly, "So was my deposit." For a second, the only sound was the clock ticking in the hallway. Her eyes flashed, her face red with fury. "Get out of my house," she hissed. I picked up the wet contract and folded it once, careful, deliberate. "You might want to dry this, too." I walked past her, opened the door, and stepped into the sunlight. The neighbor was still outside pretending to check her mailbox. She gave me a sympathetic look that was almost worse than laughter. I smiled at her politely and got into my car. As I drove away, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something else, something clearer. The humiliation had burned away the confusion. It was no longer about weddings or rugs or champagne. It was about power. She thought money made her untouchable. She thought family ties were chains to keep me quiet, but I was done being quiet. I parked by the river on the way home and watched the water move under the bridge. I took a photo of the stained contract on the seat beside me and saved it to a new folder titled Proof. Sometimes silence is the loudest revenge. I woke up the next day thinking maybe she would calm down and call me to apologize. That was the hopeful part of me, the daughter part, the part still raised on forgive your elders. By 8 in the morning, that hope was gone. My phone buzzed 6 times in a row. I wiped sleep from my eyes and looked. There was a brand new group thread on Facebook and Messenger. The title was Wellington Family Wedding Committee. The profile photo was Becca in her white sundress on Aunt Marjorie's porch. I clicked it open and felt the sting before I even scrolled. My aunt had written proud to host our family celebration at Magnolia Harbor, booked by Dear Grace. Below it, she had tagged half the relatives we only saw on Thanksgiving. There were already comments. So sweet Grace let Becca use her date. Such a generous, younger cousin. That venue is impossible to get. Only Marjorie could pull that off. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I could hear Marjorie's voice in my head narrating the story her way. Grace was overwhelmed, so I stepped in. That was the danger with toxic family patterns. Whoever spoke first owned the narrative. I scrolled further. Becca had commented too, with a row of hearts. "Cannot wait to celebrate with everyone. Magnolia Harbor is going to be magical." I squeezed my eyes shut. That was supposed to be my sentence, my wedding, my date, my money. I walked into the kitchen where Daniel was packing his lunch for the hospital. He saw my face and put the lid down slowly. What did they do now? I handed him the phone. He read the thread, his jaw tensing. Then he said what any good man says. "I am going to say something. I am going to post right now." I caught his wrist. "No. If you go in there and tell the truth, they will say I am turning you against them. They will say you do not understand Southern families." He frowned. "So we let her lie." I shook my head. "We do not let her. We make it legal." He looked at me for a long moment and then nodded. "Okay. Legal. But I am still mad." He kissed the side of my head and reached into a paper bag. I brought donuts for peace. I stared at the pink glazed circle in his hand and almost laughed. If sweetness fixed betrayal, I murmured I would open a bakery. He laughed then, too, because sometimes you had to laugh or you would scream. After he left for work, I kept scrolling. There was a photo of Magnolia Harbor that I had posted months ago with the caption, "My dream venue." Marjorie had reposted it in the group and written she loved it so much, I decided to make it worthy of our name. My cheeks burned even alone in my kitchen. This was humiliation on a new level, not just in her marble foyer, not just in front of her neighbor. This was public family betrayal on a digital wall where people could like it and applaud it. This was story financial turned into performance. A notification popped up. Aunt June was calling. She was the only relative who ever spoke to my mother kindly. I answered, "Morning, Aunt June." "Honey," she said in a low voice, "your aunt is bragging. She is saying she taught you to be generous. She is saying you were planning something tacky, and she rescued it." I pressed my lips together. "Thank you for telling me." "I knew it was coming," June said. "Marjorie always needs to be the one who gives and the one who gets credit." I asked her, "Did Grace ask you to sign?" She said, "Family does not ask." I closed my eyes. Toxic family in one sentence. I thanked her again and hung up. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop named Documentation. I screenshotted the whole group thread, every comment, every timestamp, every place where my aunt claimed ownership over my payment. If she wanted to do this in public, I would let her words become evidence. Around noon, my mother called. "Grace, can we not escalate this? Your aunt is just excited for Becca." "Mom," I said quietly, "she took my money. I know, I heard. But she has done so much for us." I swallowed anger. That was the chain talking. That was years of financial control talking. "Mom," I said, "she did not just overspend. She used my name. That is identity. That is legal. You have to see that." My mother was silent. Then she whispered, "Your father would have hated this fighting." I almost said Dad would have hated someone stealing from me, but I bit down on it. My fight was not with her. Not first. Not yet. I spent the afternoon pretending to work on wedding playlists while actually reading about contract fraud in South Carolina. I wrote down phrases that sounded calm and intelligent. Misrepresentation, unauthorized signature, financial harm, conflict justice. I wanted to be ready when I sat in front of a lawyer. Around 3, the group chat dinged again. Marjorie had added a poll. "Which color scheme do you prefer for our Magnolia Harbor event? Blush and cream, navy and gold." I stared at it and felt anger rise again. Our event. I typed and deleted 7 different replies. I wanted to write, "This is theft." I wanted to write, "This is why people cut off toxic family." I wanted to write, "You did not pay, you only signed." Instead, I closed the app. I opened my email and wrote to the venue. "Dear Mr. Myers, this is to confirm that I, Grace Holloway, did not authorize any package upgrade beyond my original booking for October 12th. Any signature that is not my own should be considered invalid and is currently under review. Thank you for your cooperation. Best, Grace Holloway." I read it 3 times. No drama, no insult, just fact. Quiet justice begins on paper. That night, Daniel came home tired and tossed his keys on the counter. Did the group calm down? "No," I said. "They added a poll." He blinked. "A poll? For your wedding?" I nodded. He opened the fridge and pulled out the box of donuts. He offered it to me again. I raised an eyebrow. He shrugged. "I am committed to the bit." I took a bite and said with my mouth full, "If sugar really fixed betrayal, this town would have no problems." He laughed loud enough to shake off the day. Then he turned serious. "Tell me you called a lawyer." I nodded. "Appointment tomorrow. Older lady. Sandra Whitmore," he exhaled. "Good. Let her handle your aunt. Because if I type one word in that group chat, we will never be invited to Christmas again." I met his eyes. "I do not think we are invited now." He smiled sadly. "Then let us at least win." I looked at my phone one more time before bed. The group chat kept moving. "Congratulations. So happy for Becca. So you always make things beautiful, Marjorie." People loved her performance. They did not know this was betrayal family karma in progress. They did not know this was a revenge emotional arc starting. They just saw a rich aunt doing what rich aunts do. But I knew, and I was done letting the loudest person be the truest one. This is not just a revenge story, Money. It is how I learned family can rob you with a smile. The Sweet Magnolia Cafe sat on a quiet corner near the courthouse square, the kind of place that smelled like cinnamon and old conversations. I arrived first and picked a table by the window where the light fell soft across the wood. My mother showed up next, clutching her purse like it held her courage. Aunt Marjorie entered last, sweeping in as if the place belonged to her. Heads turned. Even in public, she carried that air of control, the kind that made people move aside without realizing it. "Grace," she said, smiling wide enough for the room to see. "I just did not want you to embarrass yourself financially." She sat down, gracefully folding her napkin with precision. I blinked at her. Embarrass myself? She nodded. "You are too sentimental. You let emotions guide your spending. I wanted to ensure everything looked respectable." I stared at her coffee cup. Respectable is an interesting word for someone who signs contracts that are not theirs. My mother frowned. "Grace, please. Your aunt is trying to explain." Marjorie reached for Mom's hand, squeezing it in that performative way. "Elaine, I love her, but she does not understand that sometimes family needs leadership." I took a slow breath. Leadership is not the same as theft. Her smile thinned. Such harsh words. This is not theft. This is family logistics. I laughed under my breath. The waitress came by and refilled our coffee. When she left, Marjorie leaned in, slightly lowering her voice. "You are upset because you feel left out. You always had a dramatic streak." I took out my phone and placed it face down on the table. My voice was even. "I am upset because you used my name to sign a legal contract and you drained my savings." She sighed as if I were a child who had spilled juice. "If you must know, I recorded that call with the venue. They agreed it was fine." I froze. "You recorded them?" She smirked. "For protection. You can never be too careful." Then she glanced at my phone and her eyes flicked away too fast. Something about the way she shifted made me look around. On the far end of the table under her designer bag, a small red light blinked. I leaned forward and lifted the bag slightly. A small recorder sat there, the light flashing like a heartbeat. I looked at her. "Are you serious? You really recorded me in a coffee shop?" The nearby couple glanced over, curious. Marjorie tried to snatch the device, but I picked it up first. My tone stayed calm, which somehow made her angrier. "This is what you call leadership, recording your niece in public." She whispered, "Keep your voice down. People are watching." I smiled faintly. That was the point, was it not? Her face reddened. "You always twist things." I put the recorder down in front of her. "Then record this. I am not your puppet." My mother's voice trembled. "Grace, please lower your tone. Your aunt is trying to help." I turned to her gently. "Mom, she took my money. How is that help?" Elaine's eyes filled with tears. "We would not have survived after your father died without her. I know that. But this is not survival. This is control." The cafe was quiet except for the clink of cups. Marjorie smoothed her napkin again. "Grace, you have always been emotional. You think in terms of betrayal when this is business. Becca's wedding will bring publicity. The Wellington name attached to Magnolia Harbor will lift your reputation too. You should be grateful." I wanted to laugh, but it caught in my throat. "So my humiliation is a marketing strategy." She shrugged. "You exaggerate. No one will remember the details." I stared at her and thought about the years she had edited our family history, turning her cruelty into charity. Toxic family always called manipulation love. Family betrayal always wore pearls and smiled for photos. I stood up slowly. Mom's hand reached for my arm. "Where are you going?" "To find someone who speaks the language Aunt Marjorie does." My mother's voice cracked. "Please do not drag this into court." I looked at her tired eyes, the same ones that had once looked at my father's hospital bed. I said softly, "I am not dragging it anywhere. I am walking out of it." Marjorie laughed quietly. "A lawyer will cost you more than the deposit you lost." I smiled. "Maybe, but at least she will not sign my name on her own contracts." I gathered my bag. The waitress appeared with the check, unsure of who to hand it to. I took it, placed my card down, and said, "Put this on my bill." Aunt Marjorie opened her mouth, but I was already turning away. I walked out into the afternoon sun, the light blinding for a second. I could still hear her behind me telling my mother that I was ungrateful. The door closed and her voice became muffled glass. I walked to my car and sat there until the shaking in my hands stopped. Then I searched the name Sandra Whitmore. Her website said she specialized in financial and family disputes, the kind of lawyer who had seen everything. I called and left a message. My voice sounded strange even to me. "This is Grace Holloway. I need to schedule a consultation regarding a misused account and a forged signature." I hung up and exhaled. The smell of cinnamon still clung to my sweater, mixed with the faint scent of anger. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time, I saw something different. Not a scared niece, not a daughter. A woman learning the cost of politeness, I whispered to myself. No more letting them own my story. Then I started the car and drove home. Sandra Whitmore's office sat above an insurance agency on Bay Street overlooking the river, where tourists bought pralines and took pictures of steamboats. The building smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and paper. When I walked in, the receptionist looked up from her desk and smiled like she had seen this kind of exhaustion before. "You must be Grace Holloway." She pointed me toward a door with frosted glass. Inside, Sandra sat behind a wooden desk stacked with files. She was in her early 60s, her gray hair pulled back, reading glasses perched low. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "Tell me everything." I told her about the contract, the account, the group chat, even the coffee shop meeting. I handed her the printed copy of the contract with Marjorie's signature. She studied it carefully, tracing the lines of ink with a pen. After a long pause, she said quietly, "She did not steal your money, Grace. She stole your name." The words landed heavier than I expected. I stared at her hands, steady and confident. Sandra continued, "That is worse. Money can be replaced. Identity cannot." I nodded slowly. "I just do not want to destroy the family." Sandra looked at me over her glasses. "Sweetheart, they already destroyed the family when they decided your trust was optional. You are just cleaning up the evidence." She leaned back in her chair. "Here's the situation. If we cancel the contract, you lose the deposit. The venue will not refund it because technically it was paid under your name. If we sue, it becomes public record. Your aunt will deny everything. You will have to decide what hurts more, losing the money or watching her use your silence as proof she did nothing wrong." I felt trapped between two kinds of shame. Either I lost the money quietly or I became the niece who sued her aunt. Sandra stood and walked to a filing cabinet. She pulled out a folder marked Financial Disputes Family. "These women think money buys forgiveness." She said it like she had said it 100 times. She looked at me again. "What do you want, Grace? Revenge or justice?" I thought about it for a long moment. Then I said both, but quietly. She smiled. "Good answer." She opened her laptop and began typing. "We can start by tracing the transfer. Do you have online access to that account?" I nodded and pulled out my phone. She said, "I am going to show you something simple. Transfer $1 to yourself, same account. It will generate a digital trace we can follow." I blinked. $1? She nodded. "It is not about the money, it is about creating a trail. Revenge through paperwork." I laughed softly. "That sounds like the most adult thing I have ever done." She chuckled. "Welcome to grown woman justice." We filed an initial inquiry with the bank and a request for recorded authorization logs. She explained each step slowly, making sure I understood. She did not speak in legal jargon, but in plain English, as if she were translating power into a language I could use. At one point, she asked me to sign a consent form. My hand hesitated over the paper. I stared at my own signature, the thing my aunt had copied without a thought. For a second, I could not write. Sandra noticed. "Take your time." I signed it carefully, each letter, sharp and deliberate. When we finished, she poured us both water and leaned back. "Tell me about your mother." I blinked. "Why?" Because people like your aunt do not exist in a vacuum. They grow in silence. How long has your mother been letting her control the narrative? My throat tightened. My whole life. Sandra nodded. That is how toxic families survive, through generations of polite silence. I looked out the window at the river. I felt like I was watching my own history float away. Sandra's voice softened. You are breaking a pattern, Grace. That will cost you comfort, but it will give you peace. I swallowed hard. What happens next? She smiled. Now we wait. The bank will contact me in a few days with transaction logs. In the meantime, do nothing publicly. Let her believe you are still quiet. She will expose herself again. They always do. I thanked her and left the office feeling both lighter and heavier. Outside, the sunlight hit the water and made everything look too bright. I walked slowly toward my car, replaying her words. She stole your name. I opened the banking app and sent $1 to the same account exactly as she said. Transfer complete. It looked ridiculous on the screen, $1 in a sea of lost zeros, but I smiled. It was not the amount. It was the act. It was the first thread in the web. That night at home, Daniel asked how it went. I said I met a woman who has seen every kind of betrayal and still drinks her coffee black. He grinned. Sounds like my kind of hero. We sat at the table eating leftovers, both pretending not to see the weight between us. I said quietly, "If this goes to court, people will talk." He shrugged. "Let them. The ones worth keeping will understand." I thought about that long after he fell asleep. I thought about Sandra's office, the way she said, "These women think money buys forgiveness." I opened my laptop again, created a folder named Case, and began organizing everything, every message, every document, every receipt. I titled one note, "The Cost of Silence." I typed beneath it, "Sometimes revenge is just reading the fine print." The week after our meeting, Sandra called me back to her office. When I arrived, she already had a folder open on her desk, neatly organized with tabs labeled Bank Contract Communication and Recording. She gestured for me to sit and said with quiet satisfaction, "We have everything we need." She turned the first page toward me. It was a printed copy of my aunt's signature beside mine from the old college account, perfectly matched with the one on the wedding contract. Sandra tapped the page with her pen. "This is our proof of forgery." Then she opened another folder. The bank logs show your aunt's login credentials initiating the transfer at 9:47 p.m. from her own IP address. The venue also recorded her call, authorizing the package upgrade. We have her voice. I sat there speechless. It was one thing to know she had done it. It was another to see it on paper. Sandra smiled faintly. "You see, Grace, people like your aunt always believe they are smarter than paper. But paper keeps score." I exhaled, my pulse starting to steady. "So what happens next?" She leaned back. "We give her the rope to hang herself. Calmly, legally, and in writing." I raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" She slid an invoice across the desk. "Magnolia Harbor sent this for your tasting event. $800. I looked at her confused. "I never attended any tasting." "Exactly. Your aunt did. Under your name." Sandra smiled like a chess player moving a piece. "Send this invoice to her directly. Write a note. Something polite but sharp." I understood instantly. Later that evening, I printed the invoice, slipped it into an envelope, and added a handwritten note. "Since the tasting was under my name, I figured you would prefer to handle payment. Warm regards, Grace." It was short, courteous, and venomous. I mailed it to her house the next morning. 2 days later, I received a call from Daniel while I was arranging flowers for a client. "You need to see this," he said. "Check your messages." I opened my phone. There it was, a screenshot of Aunt Marjorie's furious post in the family group. Apparently, Grace sent me a bill for her own mistake. "I am calling the venue right now to cancel everything." My heart raced. I called Sandra immediately and told her what had happened. Sandra listened quietly, then asked, "Did she call the venue herself?" "Yes. She said she was canceling the event." Sandra chuckled softly. "That woman just paid for her own exposure." I frowned. What do you mean? The contract she signed carries a cancellation penalty. $10,000. It activates the moment she personally cancels. She paused for effect, and she just did on record. I covered my mouth to keep from laughing. Financial karma. Sandra added, I will have the venue send her a formal penalty notice. By law, it will go straight to the name on the contract. Yours. I smiled, which means she will have to explain why she owes herself $10,000. Sandra nodded. Quiet justice starts when paper talks louder than screams. That evening, the family group exploded. Becca texted me privately. Grace, what is going on? Mom just got a $10,000 bill from the venue. I typed slowly. I would ask her directly. Becca replied after a long pause. Is it true she used your name? I did not answer. Sometimes silence tells the whole story. The next day, Marjorie called my mother in hysterics, accusing me of betrayal. Mom called me crying. She said she is furious. She says you are ruining her reputation. I said calmly, No, Mom. She did that herself. I am just letting the paperwork catch up. Later that night, I sat by the window listening to the cicadas hum outside. I imagined Aunt Marjorie pacing her marble kitchen phone, pressed to her ear, realizing that her power had limits. She'd always believed that control was eternal, that money erased accountability. But now the same ink she used to steal my name had trapped her in her own lie. It felt surreal to win without shouting. Daniel came home, leaned against the doorway, and smiled. You look peaceful. I nodded, maybe for the first time in months. He sat beside me. So what now? Sandra will handle the legal follow-up. The venue will confirm the penalty and notify the bank. After that, I just let the process unfold. He grinned. Paper revenge. I laughed quietly. Revenge through receipts. I lifted the glass of tea on the table and said softly, To quiet justice. He clinked his glass to mine. To quiet justice and women with good lawyers. That night before bed, I opened my email. There was a message from Sandra with the subject line update on Wellington case. I clicked it open. Attached was a copy of the venue's penalty notice addressed to Grace Holloway. Total due $10,000. I stared at the page for a long time, smiling. It was poetic symmetry. The same contract that humiliated me now humiliated her in silence. I forwarded it to my own folder labeled Proof and shut my laptop. Justice did not need an audience. It just needed truth and time. Magnolia Harbor looked different under fluorescent light. The estate's ballroom had been converted into a conference room for the morning meeting. Long white tables replaced the dance floor, and a projector sat humming softly at the front. I arrived early with Sandra and Daniel. Colin, the venue manager, greeted us with polite nervousness. He had seen enough weddings to recognize when a family was about to implode. A few minutes later, Aunt Marjorie entered wearing a cream suit and pearls heavy enough to anchor her guilt. Becca followed her expression, unreadable eyes rimmed with fatigue. The silence between them felt sharp. Sandra began her tone professional. Thank you all for coming. The purpose of this meeting is to clarify ownership and payment regarding the canceled booking of Magnolia Harbor under the name Grace Holloway. Marjorie's lips curved in a tight smile. I am here as family, not a defendant. Sandra replied evenly. That distinction will depend on your answers. Colin cleared his throat. Mrs. Wellington, as per your call last week, you initiated a cancellation of the event reserved under Miss Holloway's name. The cancellation triggered the contractual penalty clause. Grace, I believe you received the notice. I nodded. Marjorie waved a hand dismissively. It was a misunderstanding. I was merely correcting a clerical issue. Sandra's gaze sharpened. A clerical issue involving a forged signature and unauthorized bank withdrawal. Daniel reached under the table and squeezed my hand. I kept my eyes on my aunt. She still looked composed, the same posture she used when lying at Sunday dinners. I said softly, You once told me I was too small for this venue. Tell them who paid for your 300 guests. She froze, color rising in her cheeks. Excuse me, I repeated. Tell them who paid. The room was still except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Marjorie's control began to crack. I made this family's name worth something. You ungrateful child would have been nothing without me. Sandra's voice cut through the air, calm but firm. Mrs. Wellington, you forged a contract under your niece's identity. That is fraud under South Carolina law. The words echoed in the large room. Colin's pen stopped moving. Even Becca's breath caught. Marjorie's face went pale, then red. She tried to laugh. You cannot prove that. Sandra reached for a folder and opened it slowly. Actually, we can. She slid forward a document with the original contract beside a handwriting analysis report. Then she pressed play on a small recorder. Marjorie's own voice filled the room from the call with the venue. Yes, this is Grace Holloway. I am approving the upgrade. Same card. The silence after the recording ended was deafening. Becca stared at her mother. You pretended to be her. Marjorie snapped Becca, stay out of this. Sandra was not finished. One more thing. She turned on the projector. The screen flickered to life, showing the interior of the Sweet Magnolia Cafe. The image was clear, the angle slightly tilted from where my phone had captured the moment weeks ago. Marjorie's voice filled the room again. I just did not want her to embarrass herself financially. Then came the sentence that ended her denials. I used her name to make it easier. The room went completely still. Colin leaned back, mouth slightly open. Becca covered her face, shaking her head. Oh my God, Mom, you recorded me. Marjorie's voice cracked. You set me up. I met her gaze calmly. No, you set yourself up the moment you pressed record. Becca stood, suddenly tears streaming down her face. I cannot do this. She walked out, heels clicking across the tile, leaving her mother alone. The sound of the door closing was louder than any shout. Marjorie looked at me like she wanted to claw her way out of the room. Sandra spoke gently but firmly. The venue will proceed with legal reporting to protect its reputation. I will also be filing notice to the bank to reclaim the stolen funds. You may seek separate counsel. Marjorie's voice came out small now. You cannot do this to me. Sandra replied, We are not doing this to you. You did this to yourself. Daniel reached over and placed a hand on my shoulder. I looked at my aunt and said quietly, This was never about money. It was about respect. You thought you could buy it. You cannot. Her mascara streaked down her cheek as she whispered, Grace, please do not let them ruin me. I stood up slowly. I am not ruining you. The truth is, and the truth was overdue. Sandra closed her folder. Meeting adjourned. Colin rose awkwardly and offered to walk us out, but I shook my head. I wanted one last moment to look around the room. The crystal chandeliers shimmered above us, the same lights that would have hung over my wedding if she had not stolen it. I turned back to Marjorie. You always said family was everything. You just forgot it works both ways. I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard her whisper something that sounded like an apology, but faded before it reached me. Outside, the sky was bright and cloudless. Becca stood by the fountain, crying quietly. I approached her carefully. She looked up. I'm sorry, she said. I should have stopped her. I shook my head. You are not her keeper. You get to decide who you become next. Becca nodded weakly. What happens now? I looked at the building behind us. Now the paperwork does its job. She managed a small, broken laugh. Justice through paperwork. I smiled. Quiet justice. She wiped her face. I hope someday we can talk again. Maybe, I said gently when the lies stop echoing. She nodded and walked away slowly toward the parking lot. Sandra and Daniel joined me near the entrance. Sandra looked at me with pride. She paid for her own exposure. That is rare and poetic. I exhaled. It feels strange. Not like victory, more like peace wearing armor. Sandra nodded. Justice is not loud. It is silent revenge done right. The fallout started faster than I expected. 2 days after the meeting at Magnolia Harbor, Sandra forwarded me an email from the venue accounting department. It was addressed to me because the contract carried my name, but the attachment showed clearly who owed the money. Cancellation penalty, $10,000. Additional communication and legal processing, $7,500. Total due $17,500. Payable within 15 business days. At the bottom, Colin had added a polite note. We understand this matter is sensitive. Please advise which party will be settling the balance. Sandra wrote beneath it in her calm, lawyer tone. We will redirect this to the signing party, Mrs. Marjorie Wellington. Thank you. I sat at my kitchen table and reread the number. $17,500. That was what her pride had cost her in one afternoon. That was the price tag of karma. Later that same day, my mother called me with a voice full of storm. Your aunt is furious. She said you are making her look like a criminal. I answered slowly. I am not making her look like anything. The paperwork is. Mom lowered her voice. She got an email from the charity board. They want to speak to her. My eyes widened. The Charleston Women's Legacy Fund, the one she had chaired for years. What did they say? Mom sighed. Someone sent them the video, the one from the coffee shop. They said they cannot have a board member involved in forged family contracts. They are suspending her until it is clarified. I leaned back in my chair. That was not from me. Mom said, I know. I think Becca did it. She looked upset when she left the venue. I pictured Becca walking out with mascara down her face, holding her phone, realizing her mother had hijacked someone else's wedding and almost dragged her into fraud. That was betrayal, family karma, turning around in real time. Once the truth came out, it did not stop where you wanted it to. It rolled through every room that had applauded the lie. The next blow came from Becca herself. She texted me that evening. Mom's fundraiser lost its sponsor. They pulled out when they heard there was a legal dispute with a family member. I typed back, I am sorry. She replied, it is not your fault. She did this. I just hate that it splashed on me. That was the other thing about toxic families. The people standing closest to the person doing harm often got wet, too. Meanwhile, Magnolia Harbor called me directly. Colin sounded both apologetic and relieved. Miss Holloway, I wanted to confirm that your original date in October is secured in your name alone. After what happened, ownership has been clarified. We would also like to offer you complimentary floral accents and upgraded linens as a gesture of goodwill. I stared at the phone, surprised. I said, You do not have to do that. He laughed softly. Honestly, after the week we had, we want a calm, beautiful wedding on that day. I covered the receiver and mouthed to Daniel Freeflowers. He raised both eyebrows. When I hung up, I grinned. I just got $5,000 worth of revenge discounts. Daniel laughed. Only you could turn legal drama into wedding upgrades. I shrugged. If I have to fight for my name, I'm at least getting peonies out of it. That night, we sat on the couch and went through the wedding folder again. For the first time, it felt like mine without anyone's shadow on it. No name hovering over the guest list. No committee thread making polls about colors. Just me and Daniel and the people we actually wanted in the room. I said quietly, This is what I saved for. Not big. Not public. Just honest. He nodded. Honest is better than televised. While we were celebrating our small win, the Wellington side of the family was not. Screenshots kept arriving from cousins who were tired of Marjorie's act. People were whispering in their circles in Charleston. Did you hear Marjorie forged her niece's contract? She pretended to be her. She called the venue and canceled, and now she has to pay. For a woman whose whole personality was reputation, that kind of whisper was heavier than any check. She had spent decades building an image of Southern generosity. One signature had exposed that it was generosity with other people's money. That was real poetic justice. At the same time, I felt a tiny ache for my mother. She was stuck between loyalty to her sister and pride in her daughter. She called me again late that week. Grace, Your aunt says she cannot pay all of it right now. She wants to arrange something. She wants you to tell the venue to reduce it." I was quiet for a long moment. "Mom, she is a woman with 2 vacation houses and 3 cars. She can pay." Mom sighed. "She said she invested in Becca's fundraiser and now they dropped it." I answered calmly, "That is what happens when you build events on someone else's name." Silence on the line. Then Mom said very softly, "I am proud of you. You did what I never could. You did not let her make you small." My throat tightened. I said, "I wish you had not had to watch this." She replied, "I wish I had stopped her when she started doing it to me. That was revenge inheritance drama, family, in its purest form, not about houses or wills, but about who inherited the pattern of silence. I chose to break it. She chose to watch. Even my bank app looked different now. The transfer still showed as gone, but beside it was a note from Sandra's office confirming recovery in progress. Words on a screen, but to me it felt like a hand reaching out and pulling back what had been taken. I sat at the table, looked at Daniel, and said softly, "I did not yell. I did not curse. I did not make a scene. And still the truth worked." He smiled. "That is because justice is not always loud." I nodded. "Exactly. Justice is not loud. It is silent revenge done right." The bell above my flower shop door jingled softly one quiet afternoon about a month after the hearing. I looked up from arranging tulips and froze. Aunt Marjorie stood there in a pressed linen suit, holding a white envelope in both hands like it was proof of sainthood. The air smelled of lavender and wet stems. She gave me a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Grace, may we talk?" I wiped my hands on my apron and gestured toward the counter. She glanced around, clearly uncomfortable among buckets of flowers and mason jars instead of marble floors. She placed the envelope on the counter between us. Inside was a thick stack of bills, $1,000. She said quietly, "Let's forget this. We are family." I stared at the envelope for a long moment, then looked back at her. "That's not even interest." Her smile faltered. "Grace, you have made your point. I am trying to make peace." I leaned forward slightly. "Peace is not something you buy in cash." She exhaled sharply. "I raised your mother. You owe me respect." I laughed once under my breath. Respect is not debt. For a second, her face cracked, years of control slipping away. She reached for the envelope again, but I pushed it gently back toward her. "Keep it." She frowned. "Why?" "Because I do not take partial payments for stolen names." The words landed like small stones against glass. The shop was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I could see my reflection in the window behind her, calm but unyielding. She straightened her shoulders. "I know you think you have won, but one day you will understand family sacrifices." I answered evenly, "Maybe, but not by pretending they are generosity." She glanced around, embarrassed that another customer might hear, though we were alone. "Grace, please." "I am tired." I nodded. "Then go rest." Her eyes glistened for a moment. For the first time, she looked older, smaller, the sharpness gone. She picked up the envelope, hesitated, and said softly, "You are just like your father." I smiled gently. "That's the best thing you have ever told me." She blinked and turned to leave. When the door closed behind her, the chime echoed like punctuation at the end of a very long sentence. I stood there for a while, staring at the spot where she had stood. Then I walked to my desk, pulled out a card from the drawer, and wrote in careful handwriting, "Invoice attached." I slipped it into a new envelope and tucked the original $1,000 inside. The next morning, I sent it by courier to her address with a small printed note from my business account, reading "Payment returned unprocessed. Emotional debt not accepted." Daniel found me later arranging hydrangeas and asked, "Why are you smiling like you just buried something and planted flowers over it?" I said, "Because I did." He raised an eyebrow. "Do I want to know?" "Probably not." I told him anyway, and he laughed so hard he nearly knocked over a vase. "You sent her an invoice." I shrugged. I am just being consistent. Revenge through paperwork. Sandra would be proud. Daniel leaned against the counter. You know she will hate that even more than losing the money. I know. That's why it works. I turned back to my flowers, trimming stems one by one. The rhythm was soothing. Outside the window, the afternoon light fell across the sign that said, Holloway Florals, and for the first time it felt entirely mine. No borrowed capital, no shared account, no one else's name written in cursive beside it. Later that night, I sat with my mother at the kitchen table. She looked tired but softer somehow. She said, Your aunt called me today. I asked, what did she say? What did? She said you humiliated her. I smiled faintly. Did you agree? Mom shook her head. I told her you simply refused to play the game. She looked at me thoughtfully. I wish I had learned that sooner. I reached over and held her hand. You still can. She smiled sadly. Maybe one day. The clock ticked between us, steady and forgiving. When she left, I went back to my room and opened my journal. At the top of the page, I wrote, The apology that wasn't. Beneath it, I wrote, Sometimes standing up for yourself is the only way to stand at all. Then I added a line that sounded like a quiet truth, etched from months of pain. Standing up for yourself isn't hate, it's quiet justice. The wedding took place on a golden afternoon in October at Magnolia Harbor. The same estate that had once held my humiliation now held my peace. The sky was pale blue, the river glittered just beyond the gardens, and soft violin music floated through the open doors. The guests were not senators or heiresses, or anyone who cared about social rank. They were teachers, nurses, Daniel's fellow firefighters, and my mother's friends from her craft market. It smelled of salt flowers and redemption. As I walked down the aisle, I saw Sandra in the front row, elegant as ever in navy blue, holding a glass of champagne with quiet pride. Daniel's smile steadied me. When we reached the altar, he whispered, You sure this is real? I nodded. It is the first thing in years that feels real. When we exchanged vows, I saw my mother crying, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. After the ceremony, she came to me, took both my hands, and said through tears, You broke the curse, Grace. I never could. I hugged her tightly. It is broken for both of us now. During dinner, Sandra raised her glass. To revenge without hate, she said, and everyone smiled, though few fully understood. It was not about destruction, but reclamation. The kind of justice that grows in quiet soil and blooms when no one expects it. As Daniel and I danced, I caught sight of Colin at the edge of the crowd nodding with satisfaction. The same man who had once apologized for confusion now looked proud to host our wedding. He leaned toward the band and told them to dedicate the next song to the bride, who made paperwork poetic. People laughed and cheered. Even my mother smiled wider than I had ever seen. When Daniel twirled me, the lights reflected in his eyes, and I thought I didn't just get married. I reclaimed my name. Later that night, as the candles burned low and the laughter softened into hums of conversation, Sandra joined us at our table. She said quietly, Do you know what your aunt did this week? I shook my head. Sandra smiled. She sold her BMW. Legal fees caught up. I stared for a moment, then laughed softly. Money back to justice. Sandra raised her glass again. Poetic indeed. She looked around the room. You see this? This is what happens when you stop apologizing for existing. You build something that outlives their noise. I thought about her words as I watched Daniel dancing with my mother, the two of them laughing like old friends. The band played a slow song and I walked outside for a moment. The air smelled like jasmine and salt. The river shimmered under the moonlight. I could still hear faint echoes of music and laughter behind me. It struck me how full circle life can be. The same place where my aunt had tried to erase me now hosted the beginning of my future. I thought about Becca, who had sent a short handwritten note the week before. It said simply, I am in therapy. Thank you for not hating me. It was small, but honest. I had written back, "You are welcome anytime, no cameras." I smiled, thinking of her finding her own way out of that family's expectations. My phone buzzed softly with a message from Daniel's best friend, a photo of us dancing captioned, "You look free." I typed back, "You have no idea." When I returned inside, Sandra was talking with my mother about starting a small legal workshop for women in Charleston. I overheard her say, "We can call it quiet justice." My mother laughed through tears and said Grace should teach the class on patience. I sat down beside Daniel and he kissed my forehead. He said softly, "So, Mrs. Holloway Carter, what comes next?" I smiled. Life. Real, small, beautiful life. Maybe a honeymoon somewhere with no phones. Maybe opening another shop in Savannah. Maybe just sleeping without worry. He squeezed my hand. "You deserve every bit of it." As the night drew to a close, guests began to leave with leftover cupcakes and flowers. I walked them to the door, hugging each one, hearing the same sentence over and over, "I'm so proud of you." When the last candle flickered out, Daniel and I stood in the empty hall, looking at the rows of chairs, the quiet aftermath of joy. He said, "This is the best kind of ending." I said, "No, it's the right kind of beginning." Outside the estate gates, a delivery truck rolled past carrying crates of flowers for the next day's event, life continuing as it always does. I looked up at the stars and whispered a small thank you to whatever force of fate had turned my pain into purpose, the quiet kind of justice that doesn't need headlines or applause, just peace. If you've ever faced betrayal and chose dignity over money, remember, quiet justice still counts. Subscribe for more stories of silent revenge, emotional resilience, and truth and closure.